the Candypants Lifestyle Podcast. Interviewing the world's industry leaders on their journey.
Where do we go from here?
Hello and welcome along to the Candypants Lifestyle Podcast. I'm Nick and this week we speak to the man who rebranded veganism, Mr. Loui Blake. But don't worry, this isn't another tree hugger on the internet telling you why you should stop eating meat, but rather a marketing masterclass from the man who has done the almost impossible, building the UK's biggest vegan restaurant where 80% of his customers aren't even vegan. He is a man on a mission, and this is the journey of Loui Blake.
Loui, thanks so much for doing this. How are you doing?
Good to chat, man. Yeah, I'm really good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm alright. I mean, the last few days I've spent just so much time reading all the stuff you've put out and finding out a bit more about you. I'm honestly fascinated because you're clearly at the forefront of something that is very quickly becoming so popular.
Everyone thought I was nuts 6 years ago, but
I bet.
It's starting to become popular now, isn't it? So
play along with this here. If you're in a lift and before you got to the bottom, you had to explain to somebody very briefly what it is you do, what would you say? Start with an easy one.
Yeah. I would say I run vegan restaurants for the most part.
So what was it that brought you to the point where you decided to run vegan and plant-based restaurants?
I guess we need to go a fair way back, to be honest. And it's interesting, isn't it? When you look at stuff, when you look back on stuff, you don't always necessarily join the dots, but there's obviously everything happens for a reason, and things kind of line up to get you where you are. So I started in football, actually, funnily enough. I left school when I was 16 and went into football. Wasn't good enough to play, but started coaching and kind of had this idea that I wanted to do something that I loved. I didn't want to go to work every day and sit behind the desk and, work for somebody else.
Yeah.
Terrible at being told what to do, what time to be somewhere, and just didn't see the point in working purely for money. So I got really into football coaching. I started my little business when I was 16, then I went off to New York and I went to Mexico. And when I was in Mexico, I actually worked for a guy who was running this massive football academy, and I saw the money he was making. I was involved from the start, and I thought, well, I can see the inside of this operation. I think I could do this for myself. So I moved back to the UK and set up my own one.
Okay.
And I think when you start a business like that, and you see actually, and you have that naivety about how easy it is, and you just start doing it, you're like, well, if I can get paid for this, and it's something I love, and I can make money out of it, what else do I love that I could get paid for? And I think it's like most 21-year-olds, you love drinking, right?
Yeah.
So I moved back to Norwich from Mexico, and at that point there wasn't really any the kind of nights that were on there were all ran by the venues.
It's a big culture switch, isn't it, from America, Mexico to Norwich?
Yeah, exactly. So it was all it was very drinks led, like discount led, and even like the more like the nicer clubs, it was pretty basic. So I spent a lot of time in London, going out in the West End and stuff. A few of my friends that played football used to go down and see them and go out with them. And I basically conceptualised this kind of premium, for Norwich premium, kind of night on a Wednesday, which was the quietest night the club had and the only night they'd give me. I took the door money, they took the bar money, put on this night and used social media to drive it. And we ended up getting hundreds and hundreds of people coming out every Wednesday. Then we started doing the Saturday. Then, started making what for a 21-year-old was, a pretty decent amount of money. And then putting nights in other cities. Went over to Cambridge, then and eventually down to London, and then bought a club. So I found myself running all these kind of things at a fairly young age. And from that point, I kind of lost touch with why I was doing it, which was to have fun and do something I enjoyed and wanted to wake up and do, and it started becoming all about the money. And I think when that happens, it's a very slippery slope. And
was there a point that you realised you'd lost touch with what you love doing?
I think I'm one of these people that does everything to extremes, so I have to do everything like 100 miles an hour, like fully immersed in whatever I'm doing. And when I eventually moved to London and was doing nights in London and being involved in kind of the club scene there, I was out like 6-7 nights a week, drinking too much. I'd started another company. I started a recruitment company within the hospitality industry at the same time. So I was running that in the daytime, doing nights in the evening, and just trying to make as much money as I could. And it stopped becoming fun. It stopped becoming fun. You know, what started as something that was really enjoyable, and I saw the value it gave to other people. It started becoming about me. I started becoming very, very selfish, I think, at that point. And it took me getting kind of burnout when I was 24, 25, to kind of take a step back. And that's when the vegan kind of realization happened.
What did that burnout look like? How did that come about?
So I was 5-6 nights a week in the West End, and then I was 5-6 days a week in the city in the daytime, running the business that we had there. During that time, I was eating out every single meal. I wasn't cooking at home at all. I was probably eating mainly like a poor diet, but you convince yourself because you're still going to the gym that you're all right. And drinking that much isn't conducive to a healthy body anyway. So burnout for me was just chronic fatigue, unable to get out of bed. I had to get really, really tired all the time. And during that burnout period, I was looking at how can I get my energy back. And I was looking online, and the consistent advice that I saw with regards to nutrition was an increase in fruits and vegetables, a decrease in processed food, and a decrease in sugar, which I'm sure we can all agree on, vegan or otherwise, are probably the cornerstones of a good approach. Just ended up adopting this plant-based diet for a month, and my energy and my skin and everything just improved. And it was all about health. I didn't even know anything about the kind of the ethical side of it or the environmental side of it. It was all really just health. And at that point, I didn't know anyone else that was a vegan. I didn't consider myself a vegan because I didn't really know what it was. But
you were a bit ahead of the curve, really, weren't you?
Maybe. At that point, it was very unrelatable for me. I was looking for like kind of advice and stuff online, and anyone that was putting content out, I didn't really feel like I could relate to. So like, I wouldn't go to the events or anything like that because I didn't really feel like anyone was really. I was had the same interests as anyone, But what did happen from there is I started feeling like amazing. When you discover something that changes your life in that way, and in a short space of time, my energy came back. I found my memory improved, my cognitive function in general improved. I just started telling people. I became that stereotypical preachy vegan that was telling everyone they needed to get on it and do the same as me. And then at that point, it was such a switch from what I had been doing. People thought I'd lost the plot. People thought I'd lost my mind because obviously the stereotype of a vegan back then, and still a little bit now, was kind of like, like you say, like kind of hippie, a little bit odd.
Like tree hugger vibe type thing.
Yeah, exactly. But through that process, I started getting really interested in it, and I started looking into it, and it just made complete sense to me. I watched more documentaries, and I bought more books, and started going to talks, and I really connected with it, and it kind of gave me a bit of a light bulb moment when I kind of realised that at the start, when I started my journey with going into my businesses, I was focused on how to give that value to other people and how to do it in a way that was fun for me, fun for them, and everyone kind of won. And then when I moved into London and I started becoming successful at that and making money, it started becoming more about the money and more about me. And going vegan kind of reconnected me to the way that my own choices and what I do impacts other people. So by going to a shop and buying product A over product B, the knock-on effect that I'm having on other people by making that choice. So it kind of made me really kind of a lot more conscious and ethic in the way that I lived. And as a result, it then directed what I wanted to do for work again, because I then had the realization that my businesses shouldn't just be fun. They shouldn't just be about making money. They should be ultimately about helping people and solving problems. And I mean, kind of blasphemy to the vegans for me saying that it's not necessarily that the reducing the meat and the dairy was the major thing. I think for me, it was the increase in nutrient-dense foods that I wasn't already eating. So, where before I'd eat a lot of meat, obviously, a lot of dairy and a lot of like grains, etc. Introducing more vegetables into my diet, more fruits into my diet, getting interested in superfoods, starting to like juice and make smoothies, and you're just ingesting more good stuff.
You're filling yourself up with better stuff than you were.
Yeah, and you're probably getting the same amount of protein, but you're getting it from a different source. And I think removing the dairy was a big one for me in terms of skin, because my skin cleared up completely when I ditched the dairy. It just, I think as well, the other thing that you realise is no one thinks it's weird when you go to a bar and you get everyone a shot and you do another one and another one, and within an hour you've had 5 or 6 shots and 3 or 4 drinks. But if you're going to drink more than one juice in a day, people tell you it's going to be bad for you, or more than one smoothie. Do you know what I mean? It's like we've got this weird kind of like
very upside down
narrative
approach to stuff, haven't we? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think whenever we do well with stuff, it's because we believe in it and we believe it's got a greater purpose than ourselves. And what that came about for me was trying to help people change the narrative on veganism at that time and try and show people that actually, it's not weird, it's not emasculating, it's not going to make you skinny. Actually, it can make you feel great, and it has a positive impact and knock-on effect. So with that in mind, I kind of left behind what I was doing with the club stuff and with the other businesses and just focused on trying to drive that. And it was an uncertain time because I left behind a couple of businesses, but ultimately it led to doing what I loved, which was marketing, branding. I started working with some kind of smaller vegan companies. I worked with a few bigger brands that were launching vegan products and I didn't consciously try and become like a thought leader or somebody in that space that spoke up, but it just kind of organically happened. I ended up speaking at events and then spoke at London School of Economics, University College London. So I had this take on kind of plant-based economics and how the market was going to shift that way. So I was saying this stuff a while ago.
Why do you think there was that shift?
I think there's a few reasons. I think the fact that the environmental situation we find ourselves in with regards to emissions, ocean dead zones, the Amazon being burnt down to make way for grazing, etc. These issues are not only more apparent to us in our everyday lives because of social media and the news, but I feel like people are now connecting a bit more as we move towards more of a global society. I think health, again, we're going through like a wellness boom over the last few years and people are exploring new diets and new ways of living. And I think there's been a big celebrity adoption, which has helped as well. It's become more normal. And certainly that was what I was trying to achieve, trying to normalize it. And probably the same as you, I found that when I was eating food, people were curious. So the easiest way for me to have the conversation wasn't to get into a debate with someone about whether it was right or wrong or whether it was good or bad. It was just to give them food, start feeding people. I'm not a cook, but I would take people to eat. Now the problem I came across when I took people to eat was typically vegan restaurants at that time weren't set up to cater for non-vegans. So I would go in there and not know what anything was on the menu. I'd sit there and everyone would be staring at me because I'm wearing a coat with like animal fur on it or whatever. Do you know what I mean? I wasn't a very vegan, if that makes sense. And so when I was trying to take people to eat in these places to show them how good the food was great, but they felt it was unrelatable to them in terms of a restaurant setting. So it just became really obvious to me that a way to change that would be for me to create my own restaurant. I'd had the experience in terms of I had 2 nightclubs before. I'd opened those 2. I'd essentially been marketing for 7-8 years at that point and felt comfortable with it through the nights and stuff. And I had this newfound passion for veganism. So restaurant seems a really logical step. And again, I had the benefit of naivety because if I knew then what I knew now, I wouldn't have bothered because it's the hardest business you're ever going to. I'm joking, but it's the hardest business you can ever possibly do. The hardest one, much harder than clubs.
Obviously, you came from a marketing background and a branding background. Do you think that essentially one of the biggest problems veganism had was a branding problem? It wasn't perceived as accessible or cool or mainstream.
Yeah, definitely in terms of public perception around what veganism is. And it still isn't great today. It's definitely improving. It's definitely more readily available and it's more acceptable. But at that point, a lot of people didn't want to be considered a vegan or tell people they were vegan because of the stereotypes that were associated with it, particularly men. We've kind of got this cultural narrative that runs that suggests that men have to behave in a certain way. And veganism was contradictory to that. So I feel like a lot of men felt uncomfortable about adopting a vegan diet. But it's improving, but yeah, there's certainly that to it.
How helpful was, not to minimise a very long journey and simplify it, but how helpful was something like Game Changers on Netflix to that whole cause of rebranding veganism?
Oh, it was massively helpful because it basically went through. I feel like the way they produced that film was they sat there and were like, right, what is every question we've ever been asked or anything we've ever been challenged with on veganism? And then they found the perfect person to combat that question and to answer it. So I think it did really well. Now, don't get me wrong. Was it sensationalized? Yes, to a degree. You could argue that. Obviously, it's the argument from a lot of people as well. It's a one-sided argument. I'm like, well, yeah, that's how most of these things are. But I found that a lot of people messaged me on social media about it. We noticed definitely an uplift in the restaurants with people coming in that maybe hadn't come in to try plant-based food before. So, and I think there's going to be more of those kind of documentaries, and as more people adopt, that lifestyle choice.
To go back to your journey specifically, what and how did it come about that you opened a 3-story vegan restaurant in Norwich? Because some people must have just gone, nah, you've lost the plot.
Yeah, but I've been hearing that for years, so it just kind of brushes off now. But yeah, do you know what? It for sure, because again, even 2 years ago, veganism wasn't as popular as it is now. I kind of figured out that I would have to try and meet customers or potential customers at the intersection of what we did and what they cared about in a way that didn't alienate them. So what I mean by that is, if, for example, we sell plant-based food, but they're not plant-based and they don't like plant-based food, what do they like that is relatable to what we do? So they might be interested in health, they might be interested in sustainability, they might be interested in yoga.
So you look for the message that appeals to them.
We look for touch points where we can communicate with them without necessarily it being under the guise of veganism. So what I kind of determined was a few different factors. The first thing was that the reason people choose restaurants now is focused on experience and aesthetic as much as it is food. So we created a very kind of aesthetically impressive space for people. I also recognised that they need to sweat the asset and consider revenue on the basis of per square foot, not just revenue as is. So looking at how I could utilise the full space. So we had a cafe downstairs, a restaurant on the middle floor, a bar and an event space on the floor above that, a kitchen that runs multiple delivery concepts. So really getting the most out of the building, where maybe there wouldn't be 50 people for lunch a day, but there might be 10 cafe customers, 12 takeaway customers, 20 lunch customers, etc.
Yeah.
And I think I just believed in it so much. It just seems obvious to me that this was the way the world was going to go, and it needed to. And we felt like we could coerce people into adopting it by being creative. And I think, like any marketer, I just relished the challenge. I was like, this seems impossible. It seems really difficult. And I'll know if it's a result of our efforts, because there isn't the footfall here. There isn't the demand for vegan food here at the moment. And the building we're going into has failed the last 5 people that had it. So, I think there was a little bit of ego there and a little bit of, rising to the challenge.
Because looking at it from an outsider, because you guys have gone, am I right in thinking you no single-use plastic, is that right?
Yeah.
As well?
Correct.
So, I mean, when you think about that, it's almost looking at it, you think, God, you've given yourself every possible challenge. You couldn't have made it any harder for yourself, really, if you tried.
Do you want to know what's the hardest thing as well? It's vegans. One of the hardest thing.
Really?
The thing that I couldn't believe when we opened was, so we also did this thing where we documented the entire build process, because being Norwich is kind of an isolated city where it has a really strong sense of community, even though it's a city, and word spreads very quickly. So I knew if I could get people hooked and interested on what we were doing before we opened, that they'd be curious to come in and see when we did open. So we worked with a local interior designer and we documented the entire build process. So when we opened,
so they felt they were part of that journey.
Exactly, they bought into the journey. We involved them. We were basically let our customers dictate part of what happened. So, like, should this go here? What colour should this be? And that was one of the strategies that we used. But when we opened, we were inundated. It launched really, really well. But the backlash that we got that I didn't expect was actually from the vegan community, because what I was doing was I was trying to essentially go after non-vegan customers, because I recognised that there probably wasn't enough definitely wasn't enough vegan customers in that area to sustain a building of that size. But also because if I looked at my mission and what I was trying to achieve and getting more people to eat this kind of food, people that are already vegan are already doing it. That yeah, they're more than welcome, but they're not who we're necessarily going after and going to make an impact with. But what did happen was the people that are vegan in that community didn't support it, and in fact even tried to sabotage it.
Why is that, do you think?
I think they misinterpreted our intention. I think they thought we were trying to monetize veganism. You know, we weren't using the word vegan anywhere, so maybe we weren't fully supporting it. It's hard to know. And I think I'd been in London for 7 years, so I kind of came back, and I didn't like integrate with that community because there wasn't anything I could relate to them on other than the fact they're all vegan, you know. So I just went ahead and opened this restaurant in the city where I hadn't, you know, necessarily dealt with them. So it was weird. There's a little community of them there that didn't really support, and that's changed since we've been open. But it made it more difficult at the start. You kind of question, well, surely these should be the people that are supporting us, not talking badly about us.
How did you win them round?
I think it was just consistently being truthful and being authentic with what we're doing. I think that always shines through in the end. If you're doing it for the right reasons and you're genuine, you're authentic, I think that comes through. So it took a little while, but I'd even say now that 85% of our customers aren't vegan at all.
I mean, that's mental, isn't it, really, to think about?
Yeah, definitely. But I think people are eating less meat, less dairy. I think also if you're looking to go out for food somewhere smart and dress up nice and make a night of it, but you want to eat healthy food, not just vegan food, but healthier food, you're normally very limited. Most food is very, cooked in a lot of oil and uses, a lot of processed foods, etc. We're fully plant-based, lots of whole foods, very, very healthy. But with the kind of the nicer decor and interior where you can get dressed up and go on a date or out with friends.
So interestingly, do you think that you found essentially you had to almost do veganism slightly in disguise until it was cool enough to work?
That's exactly what it is, yeah. That's exactly what it was.
One thing I'm interested in is obviously you're saying that 85% of your customers aren't actually vegan. How do you, obviously you've got a cafe there as well, and how do you deal with this thing of going, I've heard you talk about this, and I think it's fascinating really, that people can walk into the cafe, for a coffee, find out you don't have cow's milk, then walk out. How do you adapt to that?
It blew my mind to start with because we'd have it in the restaurant. People would come in and they'd realise it was vegan and leave. And, it happened a few times in the cafe. So I think it's about educating the staff and working with the staff so that they know how to deal with it.
How do you deal with that?
Kind of engage people in conversation. I think you just engage people in conversation, and you just, you very gently question their reasoning, or what we do is give them the coffee for free and be like, try it, because if they like it, they're going to come back anyway, and the cost of a cup of coffee is negligible. So a lot of the time, it's trying to get it in front of people, so that they realise that it's normal and it's actually really good. I mean, I challenge anyone to have like a coconut milk latte and not love it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was making it lowering the barrier to entry, giving it for free, opening up a dialogue with people, and we all, we're very good at taking the stance of like non-judgment. We're not judging people. We're aware that everyone's operating from their level of perspective and experience, and we're all evolving constantly. So if somebody comes in and is like, yeah, I'm a massive meat eater, cool, you're more than welcome. That's absolutely fine. As much as somebody who's a vegan activist, everyone's welcome.
Do you think that's where previously maybe some vegan brands have got it wrong because they were, even unintentionally, a bit judgmental?
Yeah, and I think when you're in it, it's very hard to be conscious of that, particularly those people that have been vegan for a long time. It's one of the things that we took into, when we opened in Brighton, it was shocking to me that I was looking at Brighton, and Brighton's probably the most vegan place in the country, and you're doing your kind of market analysis, your competitor analysis there, and there's hardly any vegan restaurants, fully vegan restaurants. In fact, there isn't any fully vegan, more formal dining restaurants in Brighton. And when I'm speaking to people down there, and my business partner Russ is from there, lives there, and he's saying that the issue is that they're either so vegan that mainstream customers and tourists don't go there, and the vegan community isn't big enough to support it, or they're more of the kind of casual, fast casual type restaurants, of which there are some good ones there. So yeah, I think the reason I was so confident going to Brighton, because I knew that our model and our method would work, particularly if you can make it work in Norwich. I mean, if you make it work in Norwich, you can make it work anywhere.
Looking back on the whole process of having that restaurant and building it from the ground up, essentially, what do you think you kind of really wish you knew then that you know now?
I wouldn't change anything because I really believe that the bigger your challenge is, the better you become. And, you know, when you set these massive, audacious goals, you're going to get presented with challenges that correlate in terms of how big they are. So in terms of individual, I mean, I didn't appreciate how resilient I would have to be. I mean, I thought I was pretty resilient before that, but this has just been the stress, and the level of stress that I'm able to deal with now is entirely different to the level of stress that would have killed me a couple of years ago. So I think, just the resilience to just ride out each problem, find the solution, learn from it, grow from it, and I wouldn't necessarily change anything though, or want to know anything at that time. I think I'm glad I was naive because I maybe wouldn't have done it had I not been.
What do you think it is that's made you more resilient?
I think it's the way you approach failure, losses, learnings, etc. You know, I don't really look at anything as final. I don't think failure is only final when you stop going. So if you fail at something or something goes wrong, it's more of a case of, all right, what can I draw from that? That means that next time I go out and do something that I've got a better chance at succeeding.
So what does success for you? What does it look like now?
I think it's ongoing. It's an ongoing process of realising an ideal that benefits myself and other people and the planet at large. I think it's being in service of other people and staying connected to that.
I mean, God, we've tried on this podcast not to mention the C word, but obviously you kind of have to ask about coronavirus, and I've seen scary stuff about, there's people are saying so many restaurants just will not come back from this. How do you kind of adapt to that challenge, in a sense, kind of find a way to overcome it, do you think?
I just see opportunity, to be honest. We've opened 2 new kitchens during this downtime for delivery. We've taken a new concept from Norwich into London and launched that. We're looking at ways of diversifying our offering online to digitalise what we do, looking at how we can move laterally and set up different e-commerce platform within the restaurant brand and sell out ingredients. I think it's been an amazing opportunity for brands to pivot and look into new avenues which can continue to serve them when they reopen. And look, when we do reopen, it's going to force people to be even better at what they do, to have even tighter cost controls, to provide even a better service. And a lot of brands and restaurants won't survive this. I'm confident that we will. With all sites, I'm confident that the world is going to move towards a food system that ultimately is more sustainable and more focused on health foods. So I think we're going to be well positioned. And I think for those people who are going to suffer from this, it's looking at the opportunity it creates to move on to something else and the space it creates to welcome in new things and better things.
And do you think that because of what's gone on, it's actually, in a strange way, going to push people towards that sustainability and veganism, as a movement, just because people are more conscious of it?
I think, for a few reasons. I think, well, first and foremost, whether this virus did start with a bat or not, you can argue either way. You can speculate either way. We're probably not going to know. If you look at a lot of these diseases that threaten global health, most of them are transferred by animals or starting animals. SARS, mad cow disease. There's been loads over the last few years, and they're all a byproduct of industrialised animal agriculture for the most part, or the illegal, illicit trade and consumption of animals. So I think the fact that this one's been so severe, it should cause people to question the root cause. And if they can make the connection between the behaviours they exhibit on a daily basis, e.g. going in and something as simple as going in and buying an animal product in a supermarket, economically encourages the continuation of that paradigm. So if we can look at the global impact and reduce that down to our individual behaviour, I think we're definitely going to see a change. So
finally, a little bit of a fun one. If you could make a phone call to your past self, right, and you could ring Loui when you were 25, you've just had this kind of, essentially, you've just found you completely run down and you're still doing the nightlife stuff, what would you say to him now?
Keep going. It's gonna work out. You're gonna hit a wall at some point, and that wall's gonna be the catalyst for change. So, keep going. The next hangover is going to be the one that changes it all.
A hangover certainly did change it all for Loui, and honestly, the more of his stuff that I have watched and listened to, some of the things he is up to are absolutely fascinating. He really is worth a follow on Instagram. He is Loui_Blake. You'll find his Erpingham House restaurants in both Norwich and Brighton, but you can also find his ridiculously good vegan doco pizzas and donut restaurant in London, and that's available on Deliveroo. As always, we'll be back next week with another guest, but in the meantime, don't forget to tune in to Candypants Radio. They have a new show every single Thursday, and you just need to search Candypants wherever you like to listen to your podcasts. But until then, thank you very much for listening as always, and we'll see you all very soon.